Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
Want awesome health? How about doubling your energy? With our free Awesome Health course, you can get a new video and lesson every single day for 84 straight days. The course covers everything from optimizing your digestion, nutrient intake, correct health issues, including weight, skin, energy, immune system, and so much more. The course could easily be worth $200 or $300 for, and yet it's 100% free when you go to bioptimizer.com. That's bioptimizers.com. Once you're there, just enter your name and email to get the first 3 phases of the Bioptimization report. You'll get the report immediately and begin getting your video lessons each and every day from there on in.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Wade T. Lightheart from the Awesome Health Podcast with another edition. Today, we are going to talk about some really cool things. And you know, at Bioptimizers, we love talking about cool things, cool people that are doing great things in the world, making a difference, changing people's lives, and helping become healthier, happier, and higher performers. And today's guest is really into this. He's got an amazing website, and we're going to refer to that in just a moment. So Ari Whitten is the founder of the Energy Blueprint. You can check that out at energyblueprint.com. And this system is a comprehensive lifestyle and supplement program, which has helped more than 2 million people experience optimal health, better performance, and more energy. He is also the best-selling author of The Ultimate Guide to Red Light Therapy and the host of the popular The Energy Blueprint podcast, which features the world's leading natural health experts. In 2020, Ari was voted the #1 health influencer by Mindshare, the largest natural and functioning medicine community. For more than 25 years, Ari has been dedicated to the study of human health science. He holds an MS in human nutrition and functional medicine, a BS, or Bachelor of Science, that is, in kinesiology, certifications as a corrective exercise specialist and performance enhancement specialist from the National Academy of Sports Medicine. And he's completed all of the coursework for a clinical psychology PhD. This is going to be fun. Ari, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Wade. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, fortunately, I'm out of my normal environment. I'm here, the veranda of my friend's house here in Sedona, Arizona. We're doing some NAD treatments, which is a lot of fun if anybody's ever done those. And so I'm delighted you could join us here in the beautiful sunset. So the Energy Blueprint, it's something I think a lot of health people advocate for. In other words, if you look at, people, if they come into a health stop, a fitness place, a nutrition store, they're looking at their aging, they're like, hey, I want more energy. And you can get really low resolution solutions and very high resolutions and everything in between. Mm-hmm. And I would hazard to say that the Energy Blueprint is essentially what you've compiled as a methodology, having helped over 2 million people achieve this outcome. Where did the Energy Blueprint conceptualize from? Where did it come from? Why did you feel that was necessary? And what do you think has made it so successful? So that's a lot of questions that'll let you go, but I think it's important to start there.
Yeah, I'll give you a long answer. Despite the long answer, it'll be a necessarily superficial answer, and we can dig into any part that interests you further. So health science has been my passion basically for my whole life since I was a little kid. This is something I've been studying and obsessed with, really, since I was about 12 years
just
old.
As a curiosity, what happened? Was there an event that happened or something that triggered that, or just something you were passionate about?
Well, it was originally not so unusual, typical teenage boys stuff. I was interested in, I was an athlete. I was a soccer player and I was a martial artist growing up. So I was always interested in optimizing athletic performance. And then I was sort of indoctrinated into the bodybuilding culture from a very early age. because my older brother was a personal trainer and an aspiring bodybuilder. And of course, little brother wants to be like big brother. So, that was my world from the time I was 12 years old. And then, of course, I went on to do a Bachelor of Science in kinesiology and was a personal trainer for many years, and also a kind of an aspiring bodybuilder myself. Never dabbled in the world of steroids or anything like that. So I never got to be a huge guy, but, I was in very good shape for most of my life. And
who were your earlier influences in the bodybuilding world outside of your brother?
Well, my brother was being mentored by a professional bodybuilder named Chris Martin. So, that was a heavy influence. But I mean, we were at that time, it was like reading all the muscle mags, reading, Arnold Schwarzenegger's encyclopedia of bodybuilding.
Yeah.
I mean, committed to the extent that we were watching, these super low quality VHS tapes of, professional bodybuilders, Ronnie Coleman and Flex Wheeler and all these kinds of guys. Sean Ray and Chris Cormier.
Lifestyles of the fit and famous. I remember him driving in the car.
Right.
I think a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
It's harder for younger generations, I think, to understand like how really hard it was to access information in those days.
Yeah.
The Olympia would go off, and you'd know 3, 4, 5 months later who won. There was no internet to get these things. You had to go by the magazines, maybe go to a seminar, maybe purchase a book which is some condensers, but it was slow coming and hard to get to, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then when the internet came around, when I was more in my late teens and early 20s, that started to develop and into something where you could access forums and go into bodybuilding forums. And I would get lost in there for 10 hours a day, just reading endlessly.
Bodybuilding.com, right?
Yeah. And there were several others. But that was my world for over a decade. And then in my mid 20s, something happened that kind of shifted things for me in a big way, which was I got very sick with mononucleosis from Epstein-Barr virus.
Oh, wow.
I was very ill acutely for about 5 to 6 weeks. And I lost about 40 pounds of almost entirely muscle in that span of time because I had 2 big golf balls of pus in the back of my throat that made it so it was so painful and inflamed that I couldn't even eat food. So I was living off broth for several weeks, lost a huge amount of weight. But more so than the acute illness, for about a year after that, I was left with debilitating chronic fatigue. And so that really rocked my world, because up until then, I was always a super fit, health conscious. I was an athlete. I was always in the best shape of anybody that I knew. And
your whole identity is essentially wrapped up in this, right?
Totally. Yeah. And then all of a sudden now I'm fatigued, and I can't, and all the things I want to do in life, from simple things like just hanging out with my girlfriend and my friends, to playing in soccer games, to doing my job. I had a hard manual labor job working on a fish farm at that time. And then to my school aspirations. I was also going to school, and I had aspirations to go to university or actually to go to graduate school. This was after university. And all of that, I just kind of watched fade into the abyss. It all just fell apart because I didn't have the energy to do any of it.
Wow.
And there were other elements further complicating it. Like I was working with a group of guys who were real badasses. Like the work that I was doing was very, very difficult manual labor stuff. And I was working on this fish farm in Israel with all these guys who were former naval commandos, like the equivalent of Navy SEALs, and special forces guys who had been in wars in Israel and like were really tough guys. And all of a sudden I couldn't do my job. And, after getting this sickness, which at that time they didn't know it was Epstein-Barr virus, they didn't know it was mononucleosis. It didn't get diagnosed for a couple months. And so everybody was kind of like judging me, like, why is this guy not able, showing up and doing his share of the work? And, it's just a cold. What's the big deal? Just show up and, is he a sissy or what? And so then I was also, I was feeling that pressure and then pushing myself to go to work and try to push through it. And I'm sure I made myself a lot worse by doing that. But anyway, all of that resulted in this long-term chronic fatigue. And I sought out conventional doctors who basically had nothing to offer people with chronic fatigue. And I can talk details and evidence around that if you'd like. And then I sought out alternative practitioners and functional medicine doctors who almost universally diagnosed me with adrenal fatigue. And even when they tested my adrenal function and cortisol levels and it came back normal, they still tried to diagnose me with adrenal fatigue and say that that was the issue. I eventually became quite skeptical of that and spent a long time, actually over a full year of my life, dedicated to nothing other than exploring the research around adrenal fatigue, and ultimately concluding that the evidence doesn't support the idea that adrenal fatigue is even a thing, and it's certainly not the main cause of chronic fatigue. Again, we can talk details about that if you want to get into that. And ultimately, I was left with not much help from either conventional or alternative practitioners. And at that point, I started developing an interest in energy. Okay, well, it seems like nobody's got this energy fatigue thing figured out. Conventional medicine, alternative medicine, functional medicine, natural health practitioners, nobody seems to really get what's regulating human energy levels and how to go from fatigued back to high energy. And so I thought, well, I've already spent over a decade of my life obsessed with health science. Maybe I can sort of figure some stuff out. And that was the origins of me becoming interested in that topic. And that's what I've been doing for over a decade since then.
Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, suggested that the best doctors were people who didn't enjoy robust health, but were those who had struggled to obtain or maintain it. Mm-hmm. And it's a very interesting juxtaposition to be this vibrant young bodybuilding kind of advocate, working in a hard manual. The correlations between my own life and yours is very similar. The origin story, which is cool. And then being subjected to a condition, debilitating condition. Nobody knows how to solve it, medical or conventional. You're subjected to the judgment of your peers. Mm-hmm. And yet somehow you didn't fall into hopelessness. You didn't fall into, I can't do it. And I think a lot of people under similar circumstances would either default to, well, they don't know, that famous thing. Well, the doctors don't know what it is. And you kind of go on to that mill of specialists. Yeah. And you rise and fall like a roller coaster with hopes and realities. And then you live out, we all know people like this, that they're middle-aged and they're chronically obese and struggling with a variety of conditions. And they're going to another doctor and another thing, or taking another drug or another pill, or seeing another energy healer, another component, whatever it happens to be, but never quite make it. What do you feel allowed you to go beyond that cycle? It's so easy to follow into that trap. What insight was it? Was there some sort of motivation inside you? Was there an expert? What do you think led to that? Because that's a remarkable, I think, for people who haven't suffered from very compromised health in that situation. There's one thing to sit here as a healthy person and say, hey, oh yeah, if I was in that situation, I would do this. But the reality is, people that get into that situation, it's not so easy, because you're not the same person making that decision. Mm-hmm. What do you think was the different piece?
I don't know. I mean, I was asked this question one time before in an interview, maybe a couple years ago, and it kind of struck me as an unusual question, because it actually never crossed my mind to sort of give up. Like Correct. I never Correct. Entered into hopelessness. I always felt like I was going to recover one way or another. But I also, I think because I had been studying health science for so long, it was more a sense of self-empowerment that even if no one else is going to help me, I'm going to figure out a way to help myself. And I think that was the main thing. And there wasn't anything that anything specific that was like the thing that, okay, once I found this one pill or this one method and just 5 minutes a day, I fixed my chronic fatigue and got back to normal.
The infomercial, the one thing, it's never the one. So let's speak to that for a second, because you and I think are on the same page with that. We're continually bombarded with what I call low resolution snake oil type condensed bell curve success models that are going to fix things. And what I mean by that is, okay, maybe there are situations where one thing with a given person was the element that put them over the top, because that was the one thing that was missing from the total picture. But by looking at the one, we're conditioned through marketing to look at the one thing, when actuality it was the, maybe the piece that pushed you over the top, or the piece that was deficient, or the piece that wasn't. But there's a whole, as you would say, a blueprint probably that will lead you to a series of choices, decisions, habits, and behaviors that eventually compound on top of each other. And so the one thing is really directional, not really a thing or a product or a system or a product. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's exactly right. And for me, the process of sort of recovering from my own fatigue was actually kind of an exciting process, because I had this element of, after seeing all these practitioners and nobody was able to offer anything of significant help or to demonstrate to me that they really understood scientifically, physiologically what was regulating human energy levels, it actually became an exciting project for me, because I went out and I said, well, this seems like a cool opportunity for me to direct the focus, this laser-like obsession that I've always had with health science, down this cool path. Instead of it all being about athletic performance and body composition, what if I directed towards the science of energy levels? And so, and I didn't know all the answers at that time. So it was a process of figuring it out. So I said, well, everybody knows, sleep and circadian rhythm, though circadian rhythm wasn't as nearly as well known and popular back then. This whole biological clock, the sleep thing, obviously ties into energy. We know if you got a poor night of sleep, you feel like garbage the next day, and you've got very low energy. So what are the physiological mechanisms behind that? And so I would spend months digging into that. And then what about nutrition? How does nutrition tie into this energy story? Of course, if you're not eating well, that's going to also impact your energy levels and the amount of energy your cells are producing. And what are the mechanisms behind that? And what about exercise and hormetic stressors? How do those tie into this story of energy? And I would spend months and months and months exploring research around that. What about gut health? And what about environmental toxicants? And what about light? And all these different things. And I would spend months and months and months exploring all these different things, piecing together some kind of framework. And at that time, it wasn't really a framework. It was really just a list of like 150 different physiological mechanisms that in one way or another were related to this energy story. And then it wasn't, so all of that process of discovery was actually an exciting thing for me. It was like, I was motivated to go dig into that. And I was every day excited to go see what I could discover about how the human body regulates energy levels.
So how long did it take you in your own journey to, get back to what you felt you were, I would, on the positive side of the energy equation? And I suspect that you built upon that later on with all the research and stuff. How long did that journey take you, and what were some of the key discoveries during it?
Yeah, it took probably a little over a year to get me back to my previous baseline of energy levels.
Which all things considered is pretty fast, considering that if you know people who have had those conditions and don't have it, it can be debilitating for, well, permanently, or at least for decades.
Yeah, I mean, but you know, being an athlete, being somebody who was so health conscious, and also because I was an athlete, because I was a bodybuilder, I had a mentality of I was mentally tough, I was physically tough, and I was focused on finding a solution. So, you know, I was really dedicated to that process in a very rigorous way. But you know, after I sort of compiled over several years, I compiled this list of all these different physiological mechanisms. I would say that one of the big things that actually really changed the game for me in terms of my understanding was discovering Robert Naviaux's work. Robert Naviaux is a MD PhD who runs a lab for mitochondrial medicine at the University of California, San Diego. And he wrote a paper in 2014 that I think is one of the most important papers in the last 100 years in medicine. And it's called The Cell Danger Response. And this paper revolutionized our understanding of mitochondria. Mitochondria, of course, are the things we're all taught about in high school and college biology. Everybody knows that the one thing that everybody remembers is they're the powerhouse of the cell. But the way that they're taught about even in very high level graduate school, medical school physiology courses is very much like these sort of mindless energy generators. They're just sort of one of many different organelles in the cell. It's like, over here's the lysosomes, and here's the endoplasmic reticulum, and here's the Golgi apparatus, and here's the mitochondria, and they're the powerhouse of the cell. So remember that when you take your multiple choice test. And they're taught about as these, as I said, these sort of mindless energy generators, as if they just take in carbs and fats and pump out energy. But the revolution in our understanding of mitochondria is that in addition to their role in energy generation, they have a second role that's just as important, and that is as cell defenders. So it turns out that our mitochondria are also, in addition to energy generators, they are these exquisitely sensitive environmental sensors. They are like the canaries in the coal mine of our body, and they're constantly taking samples of what's going on inside of our body and asking the question, is it safe to produce energy? And they determine that based on the degree of danger signals that they're picking up from various kinds of stressors that may or may not be present. And it turns out they can detect virtually every type of stress you can think up, from poor nutrition to sleep deprivation to environmental toxicants to psychological stress to respiratory infections to physical injuries and overtraining, you name it. Any type of stressor you can think up, turns out mitochondria can sense it. And to the degree that they are sensing those stress or danger signals, they are turning down the dial on energy production and shifting resources towards cellular defense. They are,
wow.
In the words of Dr. Robert Naviaux, they are the central hub of the wheel of metabolism. So the big revolution is shifting our understanding of mitochondria as just these sort of mindless energy generators in our cells that, you know, sort of are one of, 5 million moving pieces of important things in our body, to the central hub of the wheel of our entire metabolic function, which is all of the biochemical reactions taking place in our body. And they are fundamentally the thing that is the most upstream, that is not just involved in energy production, but actually regulating energy production. And to make that distinction, like if you have a car, there are many different pieces of that car that are in one way or another important for that car to function. Like if you take the spark plugs out, car won't function. If you take the catalytic converter off, or you take the crankshaft out, or you take the pistons out of the engine, or like any number, you disconnect one wire and that car may not function. But none of those things can really be said to be the thing that is regulating whether or not the car is driving down the road, or whether it's braking and how fast it's driving. right? So the thing that's the most upstream in that case is actually the person sitting inside the car, what they're doing with the ignition key and what they're doing with the accelerator pedal and the brake pedal. And so what we need to look for in human physiology is what's the equivalent of that? What's actually the most upstream thing that is regulating all these other 150 mechanisms, physiological mechanisms that are involved in energy production? What's deciding whether we are going to be fatigued or highly energetic? And it turns out that it's the mitochondria.
That might be one of the best illustrations of mitochondrial function that I've heard on this podcast. So I want to thank you for that, and we'll put reference to that paper. Mitochondria once separate from our physiology, and it's kind of a fused bacteria into our cells. And I always look, I was explaining people from a digestive health process is that, hey, look, we have a symbiotic relationship with these organisms, these bacteria cultures. Some are positive, some are negative, some are, depends on what's going on. But the reality is it's a symbiotic relationship that is a requisite to life.
Mm-hmm.
And to extrapolate from what you've just said, is the mitochondria is essentially the symbioticness of its function in energy production. Its own intelligence seems to remain somewhat intact, somewhat separate from the system, that it can serve as an observation point of the system, but is also integrated into the system. So it's kind of like the next level of fusion, which that just put me off on a whole tangent in my mind, which is awesome. So beautiful work, great stuff.
Well,
so
if I can add to what you were saying there,
yes, please,
one little layer that's
that.
Interesting. This is how deep that symbiosis and that integration goes in our physiology. It used to be taught in biology, what was called the central dogma of biology is that DNA, our genes, is the big boss, and that gives the instructions of what the cell does. And so it gives codes for producing certain proteins, and basically that dictates function. Well, what we now know is the whole science of epigenetics, that environmental signals are being transduced and then translated into messages for the nucleus of the cell. And then based on those messages from the environment, the nucleus, the genes then decide which genes are going to be expressed or which genes are going to be less expressed or turned down. And that really dictates function. But what's important to understand is that the mitochondria are actually deeply involved. They're central to that process through a process called retrograde signaling. So those signals from the environment are largely being interpreted by the mitochondria, and then the mitochondria are then sending signals back to the genes and influencing which genes are getting turned on and off. So that's how deep that symbiosis goes, that these formerly prokaryotic bacteria that got integrated into our physiology, into the physiology of eukaryotes, are now sending messages to our DNA to determine which genes get turned on and off.
It's a remarkable piece of engineering, and it reminds me of I was listening to Eric and Heather Weinstein. I really enjoy their podcast, Evolutionary Biologists, and I find them as very, I would say, true scientists, in that they're very impartial and they're very slow to come to conclusions because of just the natural low resolution ideology that's embedded in how our brains work, that we need to bypass a lot of mechanisms in order to function in the world.
Yeah.
But when it comes to science, you're kind of going against that grain to take apart these pieces by piece, because missing one element, it could be a problematic. And there's a recent episode where they're talking about the hot hand theory in sports, which had been relegated out of science, saying no, that doesn't really exist. But in actuality, they've proven now that it actually does exist. It's just that if you're a hot hand in basketball, the information, you got someone that's on a roll, then they start scoring a lot. But where the thing starts to average out is the defense will start to now cue in on the hot hand, and then you've got to move. And the art is for when that happens is to be able to shift seamlessly from the response of that environment to another environment. And this is something that gets lost in just like bulk counting or bulk data condensation, and where conclusions are drawn from that. And I think, and he illustrates how they would actually send people into the real world to actually do scientific experiments, because we've become so removed from the actual science of its application that it has no real world application, because people don't actually know what an organelle looks like, or they don't know how a mitochondria functions, or they don't know what the benefit of a high functioning mitochondrial is, or understand what a low functioning. They're just somewhere in that fuzzy gray zone, not sure where it is. And that's just a normal aging and decline process with these average generalized thing, the average American diet, the average life expectancy, the average heart rate. And really, if I would, I'll get you to confirm this, but it would seem to me your origins into optimizing the body through the sport of bodybuilding and its experiential, which is, let's face it, bodybuilding is a very strong deviant on evolutionary biology, in that you're trying to increase muscle mass and decrease body fat, which are two not necessarily supportive by evolution for long-term survival, but it has an optimal functioning that when you have it, it's pretty nice to enjoy. Would you say that has led you to kind of maybe directionize your whole format into this energy blueprint, this energy function of what are these mechanisms? How can we strengthen our resolution and apply these in your philosophy for maximum benefit to so many people?
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at masszymes.com.
Great question that you asked. And I think that I actually think that bodybuilding is the most optimal background that someone could have for being a health expert.
I believe the same thing. I think we're the original biohackers.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So bodybuilders were biohacking on a level that was pretty extreme before the term biohacking even existed. And the really hardcore bodybuilders were dumping all kinds of crazy chemicals in their body, not just steroids, but, all kinds of things to modulate estrogen levels, things to speed up metabolism and thyroid hormones.
Correct.
DNP, which is a mitochondrial uncoupler that you have to take in very precise, minuscule dosages, because if you take slightly more, it can overheat your body to the point of death. And lots of bodybuilders have died from using that compound in an effort to lose fat in preparation for their shows. So with bodybuilding, you get this very deeply experiential knowledge of how the human body responds to all kinds of interventions. And it's just different. It's a different kind of knowledge than what you get if you go to graduate school, you go to medical school, you get your PhD, you get your MD by doing a bunch of courses in physiology and genetics and immunology. And I've done all that stuff. So I've done all that stuff too. But honestly, I would say the majority of my knowledge comes from that that personal exploration and experimentation with my body, and also as a personal trainer, leading many other people to do it themselves. It's a different kind of knowledge, and I would argue a superior kind of knowledge than what you get just from purely academic stuff, taking courses.
It's the difference between theoretical physics and applied physics.
Yeah.
In that both are required, and that I think it's great to have, as I like to say, the eggheads out there thinking up radical ideas. But its application is where the rubber hits the road. And that's where theories break down, or as often I see, is they get refined over time through experimentation. And there's nothing, and this goes back to what Heather and Brett were suggesting, is that they had to actually take these high-level biologists, evolutionary biologist students, and then actually start putting them back into the real world, because they had become so far removed from the real mechanics of how things apply in the life that we live in. They've been so, institutionalized that they weren't able to draw the applicable conclusions properly, and get lost in the realm of ideas and theories. And when it's application, because there's also duration, okay, something could work for a short period of time, but as you say, we have these monitoring systems that are going to adjust, right? And then the art is to be able to understand when the body's regulatory mechanisms, the benefit of some intervention has kind of taken its course, and then you can carry over to the next one or the next one or the next one, and then build upon these in a cyclic format that leads to kind of a stair-step progression forward in one's energy like that. So I'm having so much fun in this conversation, because I feel like you've come to many of the same conclusions I have. I want to, without getting too far down the rabbit hole, I want to come back to your energy blueprint and the formation of this. Would you call it a strategy? Would you call it, how would you determine or define the energy blueprint for those who engage in it, or would like to engage in, or have more energy, or whatever?
Understanding the story of human energy regulation is ultimately very much connected to the story of understanding all these modern disease epidemics, heart disease and cancer and neurological disease and diabetes and obesity. And when you study all of them, you realize that connected by the same fundamental mismatch between the modern environment and lifestyle and what our biology is designed for by evolution. And to the extent that those mismatches are present, you get physiological problems. The system of your body starts to become dysfunctional, and that can manifest in all kinds of different ways. It usually manifests as fatigue first, as the symptom of lower energy levels, as sort of an initial symptom. And then over many years, it can start to manifest as something else. Maybe you're becoming obese, you're becoming insulin resistant, developing type 2 diabetes, you have cancer forming, you have intestinal permeability, you have trouble sleeping, you have brain fog and depression and neurodegenerative disease, you've got atherosclerosis. These all come back to the same thing our biology is designed for, and the modern environment and lifestyle. So when you understand things from that evolutionary naturalistic framework, you can start to make sense of things. So what are some of those key drivers of this physiological dysfunction that results in fatigue and all these other chronic diseases of nutrition and lifestyle? And by the way, over 80% of the chronic disease burden in the Western world, in the United States, are diseases of nutrition and lifestyle. So it's important people understand that, because we have so much cultural narratives around, like, oh, do you have the gene for this? Do you have the gene do you have
Correct.
the breast cancer gene? Do you have the obesity gene? Do you
Correct.
have a gene for Alzheimer's? Do you, heart disease runs in my family, cancer runs in my family.
Correct.
It's important for people to understand this message. Virtually all of the modern chronic disease burden, are diseases of nutrition and lifestyle that originate from the mismatch that I just described. And that very much includes chronic fatigue, chronic low energy levels. Humans are built to have cells that produce abundant energy. It is only when the mitochondria are getting signals that things aren't right, things aren't as they should be, that they turn down the dial on energy production. So the key is figuring out what are those signals that are telling the mitochondria it's not safe to produce energy. Why are they shutting down?
This is absolutely awesome conversation. I'm enjoying this so much because it's so much in alignment. So let's extrapolate a little bit. Let's play back and forth, because here's one of the things that I think is awesome. I think that the DNA unraveling of the DNA certainly shows predispositions for various components. But really, if I heard you correctly, and I'm completely in alignment with this, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that, okay, here's your life. There's a certain amount of energy you can produce with these things called mitochondria. That energy is going to be divvied up amongst a variety of functions in the body. And based on how your environment is informing your body is going to determine maybe the amount of energy that you're producing, as well as how much might be available to you because of interactions that may be suboptimal. And then ultimately left unaddressed, that would probably lead for you to go down from one of those genetic predispositions that is in your family, because the energy factor, if you can keep that up and offset the specific conditions that you may be more sensitive to because of a certain gene expression, then your likelihood of that expressing or shortening your life or shortening your energy or shortening your quality of life would be alleviated if you are taking the right actions in your own life. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Yes, I agree completely. And I'd like to even maybe simplify from there.
Please.
It's possible for us to obsess about differences, individual differences in all kinds of things. Like if you and I compare to each other and we compare to 10 other guys, we're going to find differences in how well our skin tans in response to the sun exposure. We're going to find differences in how easily we grow muscle. We're going to find differences in what body fat percentage is possible, the leanest body fat percentage that we can maintain. Some people might be 12%, somebody else might be 7%, and so on. There's going to be all kinds of differences in any parameter that we look at that are certainly related to genetics. However, most of those individual differences are not nearly as relevant to chronic disease as sort of a lot of the modern cultural narratives would have us believe. Let me give you an analogy that this is something that allows us humans to, I think, see things more clearly, because we tend not to be very good at looking at ourselves. So let's imagine that actually great white sharks are a good example of this. When you put, it's almost impossible to keep a great white shark alive in an aquarium. It's been tried a number of times in aquariums all over the world. I think some have succeeded for maybe a few months or maybe a year or something, but they always die. And it's a question to analyze why. Now, maybe moving away from great white sharks, let's imagine we took a few thousand tigers and put them in zoos all over the world. Okay, we took them out of the wild, we put them in a zoo. And then we track all the health of these tigers over a decade or 15, 20 years. And we start to see that these tigers start getting all these diseases that don't exist among wild tigers. So they start becoming obese, they start becoming diabetic. Cancer becomes a big thing, a very common occurrence in these tigers. We notice they become depressed and mentally ill or anxious and start, having erratic behaviors and becoming mentally unpredictable, psychologically unhealthy. We notice that they that they start developing neurodegenerative diseases. They start developing all these different kinds of diseases, of the things that don't exist among wild tigers. Now, one way of thinking about that problem would be, well, why does this tiger develop neurodegenerative disease and this other tiger develop cancer and this one develops heart disease and this one develops diabetes? These are all such different things. And we need to figure out why genetically this one is prone to that thing, this one genetically is prone to that thing. The right question to ask and where to focus your attention in that is to recognize, hey, none of those diseases exist among wild tigers. So the real solution, if we want to optimize the health of all these tigers, isn't to analyze their genetics and their individual biochemistry and then formulate a unique diet and supplement and lifestyle regimen for their individual genetics and biochemistry, though that sounds like this is the counterintuitive thing. To most human brains, that will sound like it's the more advanced, more scientific, more cutting edge approach. The actual solution is to go study wild tigers, compare that environment and lifestyle and nutrition to what they're getting in the zoo, and then figure out why all those zoo tigers are getting all these diseases that don't exist in the wild.
Yeah, it would seem that, again, what you're talking about is stop chasing symptoms. So diseases are a symptom of the same problem.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so in all of these different manifestations that seem so different and, legitimately do relate to differences in genetic susceptibilities to one thing or another, actually truly caused by, if you only can start to think through a different lens.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Which is a critical aspect. So someone is a tiger we're all tigers in the zoo of modern world, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
How do we extrapolate the benefits of the zoo, i.e. the modern world, while applying the principles of the jungle environment in our own health? Like, where's the balance?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, this is not meant to be anti-technology, because of course, technology in the modern world has lots of wonderful things to offer us. I mean, look how we're communicating right now via satellite in real time, having this conversation and then getting it broadcast to tens or hundreds of thousands of people. So of course, there's lots of benefits. I love having a computer. I love having a phone to be able to talk to my family when I'm traveling. I love having planes to go halfway around the world. The list goes on, right? I'm not anti-technology, but we do need to become aware of the specific factors in the modern world that are malaligned with our biological and genetic needs, and that create those mismatches. And with a little bit of energy and attention and effort, sometimes a bit of financial expense, then we can optimize our environments and provide those inputs that keep us healthy.
So for our listeners, because we're going to have to do a part 2 on this for sure, because I think that we've really rounded out some of the theories and we've come to similar conclusions on a lot of levels. What are some practical things? And I would refer people to your energy blueprint, to your website, to this process, because we're not going to be able to get into all the details that I'd like to on this. And that's something that you engage in systematically over time. Mm-hmm. What are some key takeaways of us tigers in the zoo that we could take and say, hey, you know what, here's some things I need to pay attention to right off the bat?
Yeah.
You would say maybe top 3 things that you could stop doing or monitor or manage better, and top 3 things that you could do that would lead you to an upward trend in your energy production.
Okay, I'm going to answer that more broadly at first, and then I'll mention a few specific factors. So there's 2 layers to what regulates our energy level. One is what is the set of environmental and lifestyle inputs that our mitochondria are sensing that is ultimately going to determine whether they're going, oh, we're under attack, let's shift into defense mode, or whether they go, oh, the environment's safe, let's produce lots and lots of energy. Okay, so the summation of stressors like your nutrition, your light inputs, your sleep and circadian rhythm inputs, your the degree of environmental toxicants, psychological stress, all of those inputs are going to be sensed by mitochondria, and they're going to run it through their algorithm, so to speak, and make a determination of, okay, we're in an optimal environment, let's produce abundant youthful energy. Or they're going to say, oh, we're kind of under attack, let's tone down energy levels by 30, 40, 50%, or we're under severe attack, let's shut down energy levels by 80%, right? Okay, so that's one layer of the story. So you got to analyze those inputs and obviously mitigate, minimize, eliminate those sources of stress, physiological stress on your body, and decrease total body stress load, allostatic load. That's one layer of this story. The second layer is, what is actually the status of your mitochondria in your cells? Meaning, how many mitochondria do you have in your cells? How big and strong are they? And this is another thing that I find is almost universally overlooked by people. People, even in the functional medicine community, operate with this kind of assumption that like everybody has mitochondria and they're there. And if you've got mitochondrial dysfunction, what it means is that you've got to supplement with some B vitamins and alpha lipoic acid and acetyl L-carnitine and D-ribose and, you know, a few CoQ10 and a few of these other mitochondrial compounds, and then voila, your mitochondria are switched back on. Well, it's not quite that simple, and here's why. It's been shown that people lose about 10% of their mitochondrial capacity with each decade of life. And maybe that doesn't sound like that much, but the average 70-year-old has lost 75% of their mitochondrial capacity. So
makes sense.
And this has actually been shown in numerous studies. They take a big hollow needle, they jab it into people's thighs and their quadricep muscle. They pull out a chunk of muscle and they literally count the mitochondria in the cells, and they are able to assess how much energy they're capable of producing. And what they've shown is that the number of mitochondria declines by about 50% as people get older, and the energy producing capacity of each individual mitochondria also declines by 50%. So people are losing 75% of their cellular engine. And this is a big deal. And it's not just corrected by taking B vitamins and CoQ10 and acetyl L-carnitine. You have to understand that this process is basically akin to, if you break a bone, you get a cast on your muscles, and then 8 weeks later you get the cast sawn off, and you look down at your leg and you see that it's half the size of the other one. It's because all those muscles atrophied from not being challenged. The body basically said, oh, I guess we don't need all that energetically costly muscle tissue to survive anymore, so let's get rid of it. It became a survival liability. And that's exactly what mitochondria are, unless you are giving your body the signal that you need those mitochondria to survive. So the modern world is deficient in those inputs, which are hormetic stress inputs that challenge and stimulate the mitochondria. And because it's deficient in those inputs, just like muscle in a cast, those mitochondria atrophy. And if you think that's how fast your muscle will shrink in just 2 months, imagine what happens to your mitochondria over 50 years of not being adequately stimulated and challenged. So that's the other really big piece of this story, is we have to maintain big, strong, healthy mitochondria and lots of them in our cells. And we have to do that through the hard work of hormetic stress. And if we don't, then we go from a Ferrari engine in our cells to a lawnmower engine in our cells. And that has massive implications for not just energy, but risk of disease and the aging process itself.
Beautifully said. That was very articulate. That was a very concise aspect of the process of aging inside the zoo of civilization.
Mm-hmm. So if I can name a few practical things with that framework in mind, Circadian rhythm and sleep, absolutely essential to mitochondrial function. Melatonin is not just a sleep hormone. It's one of the most powerful and important mitochondrial protective hormones there are. So maintain your circadian rhythm with extreme vigilance. It's incredibly important. And that doesn't just mean sleep a certain number of hours. It means optimize the light inputs that control that. Of course, blue blockers, completely dark bedroom, morning light exposure is essential. Lots and lots of light exposure throughout the day. In addition to that, of course, nutrition ties into mitochondrial health in a variety of different ways, but we probably don't have time to get into all the details of that. And then the other factor I'll mention here, as far as mitigating stress, environmental toxicants, psychological stress, and circadian rhythm and sleep disruptors and poor nutrition are damaging your mitochondrial health in many, many different ways. So we really want to optimize that set of variables. And then we need to integrate regular systematic hormetic stress into our lives to stimulate and challenge our mitochondria to continually signal to our body, hey, you better maintain all those big, strong, healthy mitochondria. Don't let them atrophy because I need them to survive this environment. That's what we're trying to communicate to our body on pretty much a daily basis. So we want to integrate things like heat and cold exposure, sauna, for example, and cold exposure. Like I went in a cold ocean this morning, but you can do ice baths or cold showers or just walk around in cold temperatures. There's, fasting occasionally. Breath holding practices are wonderful. And then, of course, exercise. And the most essential thing that you need to do, the single most important type of hormetic stress to maintain a robust, healthy pool of mitochondria throughout your lifespan is zone 2 cardio. You need to have adequate amounts of zone 2 cardio. And this is basically a little bit more intense than just a standard walk on flat ground. You can get into zone 2 by, for example, doing some hiking up hills and hiking trails and things like that, or a bike ride at a reasonable pace. It's a pace that you can still, you're not breathing so hard that you can't have a conversation. So you're breathing heavy, your heart rate is sped up, but you can still hold the conversation. We want to be in that zone for at least 4 hours a week to maintain that healthy pool of mitochondria throughout our lifespan.
Brilliant. Tell us about Blueprint, your site, and your work, where people can access more of this information, and who's it for. I think I want to get you back on the podcast again, because I feel we just set the table, and now we could get into the other stuff. But could you share all that for our listeners? Because I think everybody knows someone who's struggling with energy. Everybody knows someone who's been gone down the rabbit hole of chasing symptoms and diseases and their interventions and treatments. But what you're laying out here is a new paradigm, looking at how you can change it. And it's a very empowering one. It's a very empowering one, because it's saying, no, we're going to the energy source, and your ability to access energy is going to be determined your ability to heal, recover, to regenerate, and to live long, live strong. So where do people find out more, connect you, follow you, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So my website is theenergyblueprint.com. I've got programs on there. I've got, of course, my flagship, the Energy Blueprint program. I have my own line of supplements as well that are supporting all of the foundational work of nutrition and lifestyle interventions. And I've got a few books on Amazon as well. The most recent one that just came out a few months ago is called Eat for Energy. And that's really focusing on sort of everything I know around how nutrition ties into mitochondrial health. So it's on the nutrition piece specifically. And then if you want the broader lifestyle picture, that's the programs on my site.
Well done. Well said. This has been one of my favorite podcasts that I've done in history. And, here's one to the old bodybuilders, right? Good on us. Leading the way into the new future. Thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And for all our listeners, I encourage you to check out Ari's sites. All the links are included, the references as well that we talked about. And more importantly, engage in life in a way that allows you to produce more energy to support everything that you do, because the world needs you, your gifts, and your abilities. Ari, I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to thank all our listeners for joining us today on the Awesome Health Podcast. I appreciate you. We'll see you again soon. Stay healthy.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion, and a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.